Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to episode 23 of Young Justice, Insecurity. We begin this episode in Star City on December 4th, where Black Spider, voiced by Josh Keaton, he was also the voice of Spider-Man in The Spectacular Spider-Man, another show that Greg Weisman was involved in, he's heading to the home of Burnell Jones, and he arrives just when Burnell is saying goodnight to his daughter, Sissy King Jones. Black Spider plans to drop Burnell to the ground because he says that Burnell has been a crusading reporter. Luckily for Burnell, his life is saved by Green Arrow and Artemis, who fight Black Spider. While this is going on, we see Sportsmaster has arrived at Belle Reve. At a certain point in time, Hugo Strange turns off the security sensors, so Sportsmaster can sneak in and sneak out with Professor Ivo, while a robot duplicate of the professor remains in Belle Reve. After defeating Black Spider, Green Arrow sees Artemis off as she returns home through Zeta Beam technology. Green Arrow also figures out that Red Arrow has been watching them for a while, and Red Arrow admits he's seen enough to know that Artemis' skills have improved. But he's arrived because he knows Green Arrow wanted to talk to him about something, so he wants to figure out what it is exactly. They hear a crime being committed over the police scanners, so Green Arrow suggests that they work together for old time's sake, as he puts it. In Gotham City, Artemis is telling her mother, Paula, about the latest crime that she and Green Arrow had stopped. And Paula is happy to hear this, saying that crime fighting suits Artemis, and it's much better than her, as in Paula's previous life as a criminal known as Huntress. During their conversation, Paula lets slip that Batman and Green Arrow went to see her first before seeing both her and Artemis. And Paula had begged the two Justice League members to help Artemis out. But Artemis doesn't take this too kindly because she now thinks that she was only accepted on the Young Justice team as a pity case. Paula tries to assure Artemis that that wasn't the case, but Artemis is too angry to listen to her mother, and she storms off. After they work together to stop this particular crime, Green Arrow has a chance to talk to Red Arrow, and he confirms that Red Arrow has been accepted into the Justice League. He'll become an official member by the end of the year, but he wants Red Arrow to do him a favor and set a good example by joining the Young Justice team first. It's now the next day, December 5th, and we're in New Orleans, where Sportsmaster and Professor Ivo have arrived in a warehouse where they're greeted by Brain, Clarion, Monsieur Mala, and Tikal. Clarion at first complains about Ivo because he wanted Tio Maro for this particular objective, but then he's reminded that Tio Maro is in a coma, and he decides that Ivo's skills will be sufficient for this particular objective. Sportsmaster needs to go get the necessary equipment before they can begin. Back in Gotham City, Artemis is in her costume and she's ready to head to Mount Justice through Zeta Beam technology. But she's still grumbling about what she found out from her mother the other day. But she keeps insisting to herself that she doesn't need to prove herself to anyone, or that she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. When she arrives at Mount Justice, when she arrives at the cave, she finds out that Red Arrow has joined the Young Justice team, and she doesn't take this too well. She sarcastically responds that the team needed a real archer. And we see that Batman and Robin aren't present. They're apparently dealing with a crime in Gotham City, according to Green Arrow. But Batman did let Green Arrow know about a mission ahead of time, so Green Arrow's the one who's going to brief them on this mission. Sportsmaster was seen in an airport in New Orleans, so the Young Justice team need to figure out what he's doing there. They decide that they only need a small number of team members for this particular mission, and Green Arrow decides that the team members that were also sidekicks for members of the Justice League will be the ones to take on this mission. So Red Arrow, Aqualad, and Kid Flash are going to go on this mission. Artemis, though, wants in on this mission as well. She mentions that she's had the most time piloting Miss Martian's vehicle besides Miss Martian and Robin, who have apparently also logged in a lot of time piloting the vehicle. Green Arrow double checks to make sure Artemis is certain she wants in on this mission, and Artemis reaffirms, yes, she wants in on this mission. As they're heading out to New Orleans, Kid Flash talks to Artemis for a moment and tries to assure Artemis that she is a real Archer, and that while he is happy that Red Arrow has joined the Young Justice team because he and Red Arrow are friends, he thinks that Artemis is a valid member of the team as well. And Artemis does appreciate Kid Flash's... she appreciates what Kid Flash had to say. Now, as for what Superboy, Miss Martian, and Zatanna do, since they're not going to take part in this mission, we see a few scenes throughout the episode, but I'll go ahead and mention the whole subplot now so we can focus on the main plot for the rest of the recap. But they're bored and they want to find something to entertain themselves. They realize, though, that the room above the cave is the apartment of Red Tornado, and Zatanna points out that being a robot, Red Tornado doesn't really need to do what humans normally do, so they're curious why he has an apartment. When Red Tornado leaves for a while, they sneak into the apartment. Superboy wants Wolf to let them know if Red Tornado returns. And when they pull off a cloth off of something, they see that there's an android, but then Red Tornado arrives. Wolf fell asleep. Red Tornado reveals to them that this is John Smith, the alter ego that Martian Manhunter brought up back in Target. Red Tornado built this android with the intent of... he's in the process of building this android, and his intent is to download his personality into John Smith so he can learn more about humanity by interacting with humans as if he were a human. So that's what Red Tornado's been doing in his apartment, creating a human identity for himself. Now, for the main plot, the 4 members of the Young Justice team have arrived in New Orleans. More specifically, they're at the Orleans Parish. Yeah, that's it. The Orleans Parish. And they see Sportsmaster is rented a boat and he's on his way somewhere. Red Arrow is following him on his own, kind of like a speedboat or a wave runner. And Aqualad is swimming, and Artemis is still in Miss Martian's vehicle, but she leaves the vehicle to try to get closer to Sportsmaster, but Cheshire stops her. And Cheshire still taunts Artemis about how she hasn't told her teammates the truth about her family. But Artemis points out that Cheshire is working with Sportsmaster, and Cheshire responds rather harshly that it wasn't her call to make, but she doesn't intend to tell Artemis her secrets. And Red Arrow does catch on to this, and he helps Artemis out to fight Cheshire. And Cheshire, though, she has a radio communication with Sportsmaster, and she talks to Artemis and Red Arrow, but she words it in a way to pretty much let Sportsmaster know that they're following him, and he gets the message. So he's able to avoid them, and he manages to get a container for something. Now, while Cheshire is fighting the two archers, Red Arrow does manage to succeed in launching an arrow with a tracker onto Sportsmaster's boat. He told Artemis to make the shot, but it was too far for her to make the shot. And so Red Arrow had to do it. But Sportsmaster ends up finding the tracker, and he drops it while also dropping some bombs on Aqualad, or underwater bombs, while Aqualad is trying to follow him. And eventually he manages to escape, and Kid Flash does arrive to help the archers against Cheshire, but eventually she manages to escape as well. But Artemis says she managed to plant a tracker on Cheshire's sword before she could escape. And she has a device that tracks the tracker, of course, and she decides to let Red Arrow have it because Red Arrow doesn't trust Artemis. But what the rest of the team members didn't see, but we, the audience, saw, is that Artemis planted a second tracker on a train, and the train's going the opposite direction of Cheshire and Sportsmaster. The device that she gave Red Arrow was actually to track the train tracker, or the tracker on the train, while Artemis still has the device to track Cheshire. So Artemis arrives at the warehouse where they are, and oh, that's right, what was in the container? The container had the piece of Starro that the Light reclaimed in the episode Misplaced. And we see Professor Ivo and Brain are using their technological expertise to do something to the Starro piece, while Clarion is using his magic on the Starro piece for whatever reason. So while they're doing that, Artemis sneaks into the warehouse, but Cheshire is waiting for her. Cheshire says she already figured out that Artemis tracked her, but then she points out to her younger sister that Red Arrow had planted a tracker on Artemis's quiver, pointing out, and she gleefully taunts her younger sister that someone on the Young Justice team doesn't trust Artemis. She also pulls up a camera of live camera footage that shows Red Arrow is trying to enter the warehouse, but Sportsmaster is about to surprise attack him. Artemis uses one of her explosive arrows to knock Red Arrow back so that Sportsmaster's weapon misses him. And, well, Red Arrow and Artemis have to work together to fight Sportsmaster and Cheshire. And Red Arrow contacts Aqualad, and Aqualad sends Kid Flash ahead, who quickly joins the fight. And then eventually, though, Kid Flash says he has Cheshire's attention, so Artemis can go see what's going on in the other room because they see flashing lights. When Artemis enters the room, she sees all the bad guys who were doing something with the Starro tech, and they finished whatever it is that they were doing to it. Or the Starro piece, that's right. They finished whatever it is they were doing to the Starro piece, and before Artemis can do anything else, though, Clarion uses his magic so that they, Sportsmaster and Cheshire too, so all the bad guys disappear. And so it's now December 6th, and and they're back at Mount Justice, and Aqualad admits that they failed on this particular mission. And Red Arrow is berating Artemis for this. Artemis says she figured out, though, that Sportsmaster and Cheshire were working with Brain, Clarion, and Professor Ivo. But Red Arrow points out that Professor Ivo has been in Bel Rev the entire time, and they checked to see that it was the real Professor Ivo. In truth, Ivo had returned to Bel Rev before they checked, so they weren't aware of the robot duplicate. And Kid Flash comes to Artemis's defense, but Red Arrow shows Kid Flash the tracker as proof that Artemis actually planted the tracker on the train to send them on a wild goose chase so she could go after Cheshire and Sportsmaster on her own. And Kid Flash believes that Artemis was doing this just because she was insecure about Red Arrow joining the team. Artemis doesn't respond, and Kid Flash takes her silence as a yes. So Kid Flash decides that instead of one of Cheshire's size, he'll use the tracker as this mission's souvenir. And he says that all Artemis proved was that she was insecure and selfish. And Aqualad says he'll have to report to Batman about the failure of this particular mission. We're now at Gotham City, and Artemis quickly decides to just head off to bed, even though Paula tries to see if Artemis is okay. But when Artemis enters her room, she finds Sportsmaster is waiting for her. But he mentions that they wouldn't want to upset Paula. And Artemis wants to know what Sportsmaster is doing there. He takes off his mask, and he says he was just curious about how the Unjustice team reacted to the failure of the mission. And he pieces together, or he vocally theorizes that Artemis was blamed for the failure. And then Sportsmaster begins to question if Artemis will still be able to stay on the Unjustice team because Red Arrow has joined them, and if her teammates would ever trust her if they were to ever find out about her family connections or who her family members are. Artemis sarcastically thanks Sportsmaster for this pep talk, revealing that Sportsmaster is her dad. Sportsmaster responds that while Artemis can fight her criminal relatives all she wants, she can't fight who she is inside. And he tells his youngest daughter that it's time to switch sides because she'll never be one of the Unjustice team or never be one of the heroes. And that's how we end the episode. So we have ourselves another Artemis Spotlight episode. And this is the one that explicitly reveals that Sportsmaster is Artemis's father. And that was the case in the main DC comics as well. I mentioned it before in Homefront. The big difference between the main comics and this adaptation is Cheshire's connection to Artemis and Sportsmaster. I believe Artemis did have an older sister, but it was a different character. So Cheshire is filling in for the spot that the older sister of Artemis in the main DC comics had. So that's the big difference. Cheshire is related to the Croc family. That's their last name, Artemis Croc. Cheshire is related to the Croc family in this adaptation when she wasn't before. But that's the big difference. And it was also revealed in this episode that Red Arrow will be joining the Justice League. So we do know the Justice League will be gaining a new member. So that's been confirmed after the meeting from the previous episode agendas. But we still... and that's right. Red Arrow will has joined the Unjustice team before he officially becomes a member of the Justice League. Otherwise, though, this did have a few hints of things to come in the future. Sissy King-Jones is actually the civilian identity of the character Arrowette, and Arrowette has recently been confirmed to appear in Season 3, so we'll get to see how that plays out. And, I should mention, I liked the casting gag with Josh Keaton as Black Spider. He was essentially playing evil Spider-Man, and that was just a fun casting gag, if you asked me. And otherwise, we see a few more things like Red Tornado's civilian identity and the Starro piece for the Light's plans, but we're getting closer to the end of Season 1, And with that said, we've now discussed episode 23 of Young Justice on this channel. Take care, and until next time.